Do good work is not a label, but a way of living. It is the constant and diligent effort to achieve a new level of excellence in one's own life. It is the hidden inner beauty behind the struggle to achieve excellence. It's not perfect, but imperfect. It is the effort, discipline, and focus that often goes unnoticed. The goal of Do Good Work is to highlight that drive. The guests I have on this show emulate this drive in their own special way. You'll be able to apply new ideas into your own life by learning from them. We will also have one-on-one episodes with me where we'll dive into my own experience with entrepreneurship and leadership. Every episode is designed to provide you with ideas that you can apply and grow in excellence in all areas of your life, business, and career.
34 years ago, a young and curious Walter Crosby began his sales career in New York City. His desire to learn and grow was, and currently is still, insatiable. He rapidly advanced in several industries and markets across the United States and Canada, fulfilling business development, sales coaching, and sales management positions. But he was frustrated by the lack of training every time he was promoted to a management role, so he sought out that training for himself. That led him to find Helix Sales Development, where he now shares his experience and knowledge to the world. With a deep understanding of and rare insight into managing and implementing a sales process, Walter has a strong record of rapidly creating high-performing sales departments at firms from $10 million to $50 million in sales. Walter has led Helix Sales Development to form strategic relationships with partners whose evidence-based tools provide unique insights that power its transformative work with its clients. The unique best-in-class sales assessment tools, repeatable sales process, and CRM software have proven to be exactly what businesses need to transform their sales organizations. Not only is Walter a connoisseur of sales management, but he's also managing an active lifestyle, traveling with his family, golfing, sampling interesting wines with his wife of 20 years, keeping up with his teenage daughter, and occasionally burning a fine cigar in his private cigar lounge. Well, Walter, thank you so much for being on.
Appreciate the opportunity.
I love it, Walter. So, Walter, some of the things that you and I discussed and that you sent over, we were talking about sales management, sales process. For all of our listeners out there, can we just define and understand what does a sales manager actually do, just so that we understand our definitions before we dive into how to leverage a sales manager?
Okay, so what a sales manager should do, or what do they usually do? I mean,
let's define the ideal.
Okay. So a sales manager should be managing the department similar to what, the CFL does to manage finance and treasury and all of those other aspects. So there's an element of accountability. There should be an accountability framework. There should be agreed upon metrics that tie back to the individual's goals and the company's goals. So there should be some congruency there. And it's probably 10, 15% of the time that, it's just that all the meetings that need to happen that are not directly related to sales, and some of the paperwork that is done that isn't necessarily automated. But the bulk of their time should be spent around coaching the salespeople. And that's usually what's missing. That culture of coaching within the sales organization is often missing, and they should be spending 60-70% of their time on that.
So that's kind of interesting when you mentioned earlier that sales management's focusing on, it might be over redundant to have a lot of administrative tasks under their plate because they're in a department of sales. And I know sales is like a different animal within a department or a company, really. So I want to dive into your perspective in regards to sales teams or even sales people being too involved in the administrative work of the company, even though some of that work is needed by, let's say, the operations team, onboarding team, the product or service fulfillment team. So how do you balance that?
Well, it's about priorities. So if you're onboarding somebody, that's a critical element of success for those salespeople that are being onboarded. Mm-hmm. So that takes a priority for that for that initial week or two, especially to get them going. The onboarding process probably takes about 90 days. But we should be involving, as a sales manager, we should be involving other people in the organization, making the right introductions, allowing the new salesperson some interaction with other key staff, the people that they need to develop relationships with. So that's sometimes an administrative function. What we really want to avoid is the inefficient use of time. So if we can use the right technology so that we're not wasting time with lots of reports and asking salespeople to do these inefficient things. If we're using the right technology in the right way, so that reporting all should be there. That reporting should be just to be able to be pulled out of a report manually or ideally on a regular basis, kicked out. As a salesperson, I hated writing reports.
Yeah.
And as a sales manager or a business owner, I dislike reading them as much as I did writing them. So if we can pull that data out and it be in the moment and be timely, using the right technology, we can be much more efficient.
It's for both parties as well, but like you mentioned, the manager as well as the salesperson being able to make everyone more efficient by using either the right technology stacks or automations to be able to get the right data. And then also when you mentioned earlier about the right metrics that tie to an individual goals and that correlate to the company goals. And I think, it might seem pretty simple to look at sales and say their goals are attached to the actual bottom line sales goals for the department. But how do you distinguish between the salesperson's goals and the sales manager metrics or milestones to track success on a quarterly or semi-annually basis?
Well, they need to be leading indicators, just like in economics, right? Lagging indicators don't really help us. It's like, yeah, we missed last quarter's numbers. And doing the postmortem might be important, but what we try to do is look at things that can be controlled by the person whose metrics, they own the metrics. So salespeople control their time, they control their behaviors, and they control their activities. So as a sales manager and sales leaders, we need to help them understand what those metrics are. So I think it's an important piece that sometimes is missed, where we identify what numbers need to be achieved, by the organization, what the department needs to do. And then we take those numbers and then help the salesperson understand that they can achieve them, how they achieve them, and how we're going to measure that. But the piece that's really, really important is to tie it back to something that's meaningful and personal to the salesperson, right? What do they really need? And it depends on the salesperson. There's really no clear, we have to have that conversation. Are they looking to buy a house? Are they looking to buy a boat? Are they looking to just get a kid through college? Whatever they are in life, how can we help them in this role as a manager? How can we help them achieve their personal goals? And if we achieve their personal goals and they're congruent with the company goals, we all win. And if that's not congruent, we usually have some trouble pulling that lever.
That's interesting. So I love that you mentioned that it has to first be achievable. You can't. I remember speaking to local cybersecurity company. Their goals were not even close to achievable. They're like 3x the amount of achievable, which is, it could some issues with management there, which is some questions around management there really. But the first thing is making sure that the goals are achievable. And you look at obviously historical data, baseline data, being able to say, okay, if we want to grow, let's say, by 10 points this quarter, like 10%, or be able to grow by 25% depending on the volume that you're doing, making sure that it is achievable, but also showing the path to do so. And I think that's really valuable to have a proven process, or at least know the fundamentals of what works, so that you can have confidence when you lead a team, as opposed to not knowing what works and being kind of blinded when you're walking down the path. And then making it personal. I think it's quite important to tie it back to, making sure that the best description was understanding that your personal why, your purpose, your values that you're doing for the company attached with the company values, but they're like that overlap too. And so making it personal is it's pretty pretty impactful. But you also mentioned, and I don't want to just briefly go over this. I want to dive a little deeper. You mentioned that sales managers, though, they're under leveraged. And then why are we under leveraging or not using sales managers effectively? Is it mostly on the sales training side that you indicated earlier?
Well, I think if we take a couple of steps back,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can use my personal experience. Every time that I was promoted into a sales management role,
Mm-hmm.
early on, I had no idea how to do the job. So a lot of salespeople don't have a mentor. They don't have an example of what good sales management is. Now, especially in that small to mid-market company where they're really trying to create their culture and really trying to grow. If they don't have that growth mindset built in, and they don't give the sales managers tools, then they're going to struggle. So I've seen companies put salespeople in sales training, and they do that the wrong way. But let's just pretend it's a good way to do it. But they don't include the sales managers. They don't include them in what's being taught. So how do they tie that back to the everyday, the every week? So it goes back to that issue of, if we're not giving them the tools that they need, we're not giving them the training, we're putting this sort of short-term mentality around, we got to hit our monthly goals, we got to hit our quarterly goals. And that's fine, but if the sales manager is ill prepared for their role, it's just a disaster waiting to happen. So and then it becomes that, everybody pounding their fist on the conference room table because we're not hitting our numbers, and I need to know why. There's usually some hidden weaknesses within the team. Nobody's perfect. We all have weaknesses, and there's the coaching piece I'll come back to. But even if we're going to do some development work and train them, we can't do it in 3 days. You can't do it with a fire hose. That training and development needs to be embedded into the organization. The sales manager needs to be able to work that into their training and their coaching around the same topics. So if we're not blending that all together, it's just like you went to the seminar, you got a nice little buzz off of it, it all feels good, and 30 days later, what was that about? And if we can do that in smaller pieces, and we give that sales manager the tools they need, they typically don't know how to coach. Even the ones that were great athletes, they had coaches, and they're not able to translate that type of coaching into sales. And there's a lot of metaphors that go back and forth about athletics and sales, right? And I think that they don't resonate at the end of the day, because an athlete expects coaching, right? They expect to sit in that room and watch a film, and somebody saying, your feet aren't moving, right? Your arm is not going back far enough. Your hands are too low on the swing, whatever the sport is. So they expect it. They know it's a safe place to operate, and they get that feeling that they can get better they get the help. In the commercial space, and with sales organizations, typically that safe space isn't typically there. That coaching mentality isn't there, and it hasn't been developed. And I think until we really start to address that on a corporate level, it's going to be difficult. I mean, I'll have a job for a long time. I'm happy with that, but it really needs to change that shift in the culture to allow people to practice someplace, and it not be on the customers and the prospects.
You're going so much deeper here than it's not just one department, it's the actual DNA of the organization. It's like the culture of how that organization thinks and works with its team members, and making sure that they actually have functional, going back to some of like functional training, functional implementation of what they're learning, not just here's a seminar for 48 hours and go for the next 2 years to execute on what you just learned. And it's pretty interesting. So to better understand, so for preparing sales managers, one of the things that I've learned, I believe it's from Dan Kennedy, that he mentioned that it's sometimes irresponsible to take a really stellar salesperson and make them into a sales manager because he just lost a really stellar salesperson who's not a really good manager. So it's making sure that we do the appropriate moves and knowing who's a good fit for that role. But from your experience working with an organization, so doing this, what are some of the characteristics that makes more sense to fit a sales management role?
There's actually another level of frustration with moving the top salesperson into the sales management role. Corporate people get up, the leadership get frustrated, the sales manager's frustrated, the rest of the sales team is frustrated too, right? Mm-hmm. So you've lost the revenue and now you're starting to frustrate the rest of the group. I think it starts with desire and commitment. If that person that's being moved from a field rep to the managerial role, even if they're carrying a quota still, they have to want that. They have to want to take on that challenge, and then they're going to need to want to learn and try to figure out how to do this. If the framework isn't already in place, and it usually isn't. So when it happened to me, I realized a couple of days later, like I don't know how to do this. In reality, I know how to look at metrics and I know what I need to do every day, but how do I help them figure that out? And so, I did what, a lot of people do, is to start reading books and listening to tapes and CDs and finding, mentors and providing myself with good ideas. And it takes longer that way. But what I really needed to do at that point was to go find a sales management coach to get me, prepared to do what I needed to do. So if the organization from top down is trying to support their frontline management, they need to give them the tools to do the job well. And if that salesperson doesn't have the desire to become a sales manager,
it's all lost there. It makes a lot of sense. And I know that we can't really, in the short time that we have been a podcast together, like an hour, 30 minutes, 2 hours, we couldn't even touch the biggest needle movers when it comes to preparing salespeople. Because like you mentioned, it has to be in part of the DNA of the organization. But I do want to touch on the coaching frameworks. That's kind of like the second piece to making great sales managers, being able to coach the sales team. And based on your frameworks for coaching, what are some of the best ways that you've seen organizations thrive by the pivotal training or coaching that's provided by a sales management team?
So we try to help a sales manager understand that there's different types of coaching. Like you said, we could spend hours talking about that, and books have been written about it. But in a real simple way to describe it is to help them realize that there's a time for formal coaching, right? To have a model that you're comfortable with to coach somebody in a formal situation. That might be a quarterly review or an annual review, and that should be a little bit more structured and formal. But what we want the sales managers to do on a more regular basis is coach the individual, coach that salesperson first, and then coach the team. So the primary piece where you can really leverage that time is on that individual. Everyone's at a different point in their learning, in their experience, in their development, and their skill set. So it's if you go and work with them on an individual basis and really understand, listen, they have to build that rapport, they have to build that trust. They can't go too fast. But once that's established, and we realize as a salesperson that this manager is here to help me, when they provide constructive criticism, that's what it's meant to be. It's meant to be constructive. So the sales manager needs to be able to modulate how they deliver. Right? You can't deliver the message the same way. It might be the same message, but it needs to be delineated by tone and your words. And, just this morning I had a conversation with two salespeople, same company, same decision makers, the same process, but they're two different people. I have permission to coach the one gentleman as if I'm a football coach, right? And, to treat him like a football coach does, you grab him by the face mask sometimes, but I have the permission to do that. That's what he's okay with. The other salesperson, she needs to be handled a little bit more professionally, a little bit softer, in that I need to deliver my message in a way it's clear, it's concise, but it's not, it's much more positive than it is the constructive side. So I have to modulate for who I'm working with.
Depending on how they receive it too, because that's the way that they want to receive it. That's key.
That's an excellent point. So if I'm not listening and watching what I'm doing, even if you make a mistake and you go a little harder in this situation than you should, you need to be able to back up and say, okay, I didn't do that well. Can we try that again? And let me try to get this message. So they need to feel safe. And if you do anything that violates that, even just once, it creates a different structure in the relationship.
Distrust,
distrust is the ultimate piece of it. But we need to make sure that it's appropriate for the individual. And you can't just do the team. You got to work with the individuals. And I think that's a big component of, we can't just put everybody in a room and start talking about things, because there's always going to be a couple of people that don't want to join in the conversation. They're a little uncomfortable. And even if you try to pull them in, you're not getting your message across as well. I think that's a piece. The individual coaching, that one-on-one stuff, takes a little more time. But if you really want to be effective, it's incredibly powerful. And then using some technology is important too. We use the ability to have salespeople record their calls, and even just practice making we do challenges with them, and they will have to execute something and record it, and then we're able to listen to it and give them feedback, and it's in the moment, right? We're not doing that traditional debrief. We actually can hear what was said, and we can tell them, hey, you did a great job. You asked these two great questions, and then the prospect kind of fell off. Maybe if you had asked one more question and it sounded like this, it would have, so they can see exactly in the moment when they were there, they were a participant, and it accelerates their ability to make those connections, connect the dots.
That's pretty cool. And that goes back to kind of like the principles that you mentioned of setting the environment. You mentioned safe, like psychologically safe spaces, making sure that the communication is clear and in an effective way, that it resonates to the listener, which I think is a key principle. So I love that you shared that. So Walter, I kind of want to switch gears and ask a fun question. Tell me about your favorite sale.
It's a good question. I think it's the one where I was working in a family business, where the family was, I could say this politely, dysfunctional. And I was told that there was no way I was going to close that deal.
Wow.
Don't even bother. And I, ask a lot of questions. When somebody challenges me like that, I want to understand why. And maybe there's something that I really don't understand and I don't have a shot. And it wasn't a test. It wasn't a way to, he wasn't trying to push me to go beyond my limits. He just was that was his way. So it was a long sales cycle. I had lots of moving parts. I had to sell the same concept to 4 different organizations. Wow. It was part of a construction component. And it was a challenge. But I just always heard that you're not going to do this. It was in the back of my head, right? That I wasn't going to be able to close this. $1 million sale. with like an annuity attached to it with a contract.
Oh, wow.
So it ended up closing. It ended up being greater than what the anticipation of it being, like, a larger revenue stream. It was incredibly satisfying. Not so much because it was, you can't do it, although that was the starting point, but it was that I sat back and I could see that I connected all of these people, and that I was able to put the pieces together, put the people together. And I had to tell somebody early on, at some point, Rob, you're going to have to stand up and tell these people it's my money and we're going to do what I want to do.
Oh, wow.
And I wasn't in the room for that, but when we were kind of doing a kind of a lunch to talk about, how the deal gone, he's like, you told me something 14 months ago that I actually had to do. I actually had to stand up in the room, pound my fist on the table, and say, it's my money. We're going to do things my way, and I want this to happen. And it was very satisfying. A lot of work, but it was fun the whole time. It was like putting a puzzle together.
I love how you described it as well. That's a huge talent and gift to be able to connect the dots and people and understand and how to do that. To I somewhat do similar but for a different space. But that's awesome, Walter.
But the irony, I'll share this real quick. The guy that told me I couldn't do it,
yeah,
I kept going back to him saying, "Hey, I reached this impasse. What do you think? He had more experience than I did. He owned a company, right?
Yeah,
and he was always willing to sit with me. I didn't do it on my own. It's always a team effort.
Absolutely.
But it was that was fun. It was a good memory. Thanks.
Absolutely, Walter. Well, Walter, for all of our listeners out there, what's the best place for people to go to say thank you for this episode and reach out to you?
I think the website is a good way to take a look, and there's several ways for them to connect. So it's helixsalesdevelopment.com. Or they can find me on LinkedIn, Walter Crosby.
Wonderful. And I'll have that in the show notes as well. Walter, thank you so much for being on again.
Appreciate it. It was fun.